The Himalayas have always been framed as the roof of the world, a sacred expanse of jagged peaks and thin air, where the veil between the physical and the spiritual is said to be at its most fragile. For centuries, pilgrims and mystics have spoken of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightened beings tucked away in the folds of the mountains. But for those who look at the world through the lens of cold, hard data, the legend is no longer a matter of faith. It is a matter of thermal imaging. In the autumn of 2021, a declassified batch of satellite telemetry, originally intended for climate monitoring, began to circulate within private intelligence circles. It showed something impossible. Deep beneath the permafrost of the Tibetan Plateau, in a region geologically classified as stable, there were heat signatures. These were not the random flickers of volcanic activity or the predictable hum of geothermal vents. They were structured, they were rhythmic, and they were immense. When experts overlaid these anomalies with ancient, fragmented cartographic data, the so-called Shambhala coordinates, the implications became chilling. We are not looking at a hidden monastery or secret military base. We are looking at a subterranean complex that defies the laws of human architectural evolution. The heat signatures suggest a massive, artificial environment maintained by a power source that has been running for millennia, buried under 2 miles of solid ice. The geopolitical scramble that followed was swift and silent. Superpowers shifted their surveillance focus, moving away from border disputes and toward the deep crust anomalies. Why would global intelligence agencies risk diplomatic instability for a patch of frozen, inhospitable wilderness? Because the data suggests that whatever is down there does not belong to the history books we were taught in school. The structural integrity of these heat signatures suggests materials that shouldn't exist in the Earth's crust, alloys that exhibit properties of superconductivity at temperatures that should render them inert. We have spent decades looking toward the stars for signs of non-human intelligence, scanning the cosmos for radio bursts and light-years distant signals. We assumed that if they were here, they would descend from the clouds in ships of chrome and fire. We were looking in the wrong direction. We were looking at the sky while the answer was waiting beneath our feet, locked away in a tomb of ice that has been guarded by silence for an eternity. This is not a story about ghosts or spirits. It is a story about a civilization that predates the dawn of recorded human history. A civilization that didn't disappear. It simply moved underground. As the ice continues to thin, driven by a changing climate that was never meant to expose these secrets, the barrier between their world and ours is beginning to fail. The coordinates are no longer just lines on a map. They are a countdown. The anomalies are growing in intensity, pulsing with a frequency that modern sensors can barely track. We have spent our existence believing we are the masters of this planet, the pinnacle of its evolutionary trajectory. But as we dig deeper into the mystery of what lies beneath the Himalayan ice, we are forced to confront a disturbing realization. We are not the masters of this Earth. We are merely the current inhabitants of a house that has been occupied by something else for a very, very long time. And now, the landlord is beginning to wake up. In the winter of 1938, the thin, freezing air of the Himalayas did not just carry the bite of the altitude. It carried a secret that had haunted the corridors of power in Berlin and London alike. While the world looked toward the gathering storm clouds of total war, a select few were looking down. They were not interested in borders, ideologies, or the shifting tides of geopolitics. They were looking for a doorway. The legend of Shambhala, the city of the 1,000 petals, had been whispered for centuries by monks in the high mountain passes. It was said to be a sanctuary of the enlightened, a place where the laws of time and space bent to the will of those who dwelt within. But to the architects of the Third Reich, Shambhala was not a spiritual destination. It was a tactical objective. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the SS Honor Nearby, believed that the Aryan race did not originate from the mud of Europe, but from a subterranean empire of gods. He was convinced that the permafrost of the Himalayas concealed the remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization, a race of beings who possessed technology that could render modern weaponry obsolete. He sent expedition teams deep into the Tibetan plateau, not with prayer beads, but with topographic maps and occult instruments designed to detect anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. These men were not explorers in the traditional sense. They were treasure hunters of the forbidden. They scoured the caves of the Kunlun Mountains, looking for the specific coordinates mentioned in ancient Sanskrit texts, the entrance to the hollow earth. They were searching for the Vril, a primordial energy source that powered the cities of the old gods. And they weren't alone. The world's attention was fixed on the Atlantic. British and American intelligence officers were tracking the movements of these expeditions with a growing cold dread. They had intercepted documents, fragments of maps, and decoded correspondences that hinted at something truly unsettling. The artifacts the Germans were hunting were not mere statues or gold. They were biological. They were technological. They were, according to the whispers in the intelligence community, non-human. The archives of the era are filled with redacted reports of strange atmospheric lights seen over the Himalayas, reports of reconnaissance planes disappearing without a trace, and accounts of soldiers returning from the high ranges with eyes that seemed to have looked upon something that shattered their sanity. They spoke of tunnels that defied the geometry of the natural world, of corridors lined with a material that felt like warm flesh, and of sounds emanating from the deep earth, a rhythmic, mechanical thrumming that suggested the planet itself was a machine. Why would two warring factions, on the brink of destroying one another, both divert precious resources to the frozen wasteland of the Himalayas? The answer lies in the nature of the discovery. They weren't just looking for a lost city. They were looking for the keys to the kingdom. If the Hollow Earth Protocol was true, then humanity was not the master of this world. We were merely tenants living on the surface of a shell, unaware of the architects who moved beneath our feet. As the expeditions pushed further into the ice, the line between history and nightmare began to blur. They found artifacts that carbon dating could not explain, metallic alloys that did not exist on the periodic table, and inscriptions that predated the emergence of modern man by hundreds of thousands of years. But the most disturbing discovery was the realization that they were being watched. The silence of the Himalayas is not empty. It is awake.
It is the silence of a tomb that is still occupied. When those early explorers touched the walls of the subterranean chambers, they were not greeted by open arms or divine wisdom. They were greeted by a warning. The obsession of the 1930s wasn't about finding enlightenment. It was about waking something that had been hibernating since the dawn of time. And as the records suggest, some things, once disturbed, do not simply go back to sleep. They wait. They watch. And they remember the faces of those who tried to break the seal. Suspense. For centuries, the monks of the high Himalayas spoke of a place that exists in the cracks of our reality. They called it Shambhala. To the modern world, it was dismissed as a beautiful lie, a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment, a paradise of the mind. But what if the monks were not poets, but cartographers? What if they were not describing a state of consciousness, but a physical location, buried deep beneath the crushing weight of the world's highest peaks? deeper we dig into the archives of the Tibetan manuscripts, the more the myth begins to bleed into the language of modern geophysics. We are no longer talking about fairy tales of ageless kings and golden cities. We are talking about the Hollow Earth Protocol. When you look at the seismic data gathered by clandestine expeditions over the last 2 decades, something impossible emerges from the static. Beneath the permafrost of the Himalayan plateau, there are voids. Massive, interconnected, and mathematically precise subterranean chambers that defy the laws of natural geology. These are not caves carved by ancient rivers. They are vast, echoing cathedrals of stone that show no signs of erosion. They are geometric. They are deliberate. And they are precisely where the ancient texts claimed the gates to the inner world would be found. The coordinates mentioned in the Kalachakra Tantra, the ancient texts detailing the path to the hidden kingdom, align with startling accuracy to these geophysical anomalies. It is as if someone took a map of the Earth's crust and decided that the surface was merely a skin, and that the true architecture of our planet lies beneath the ice. But this is where the mystery curdles into something darker. If these voids were natural, they would be filled with debris, with the slow, crushing sediment of eons. Instead, the seismic readings suggest a hollow interior, a space that has been maintained, protected, and perhaps inhabited. When geophysicists analyze the sound waves bouncing off these structures, they don't get the chaotic echo of jagged rock. They get the rhythmic, haunting resonance of empty halls. We have to ask ourselves, who built them? And more importantly, why are they still waiting? The folklore speaks of the Agothans, the beings who retreated into the mantle when the surface became a place of fire and chaos. They were not just survivors. They were the architects of a civilization that never needed the sun. They possess a technology that doesn't rely on combustion or silicon, but on the very vibrations of the earth itself. The ancient texts call it the power of the Vajra, a force that could split mountains and manipulate the fundamental gravity of the planet. As we decode these manuscripts, we find warnings. They do not warn us against the cold, or the altitude, or the lack of oxygen. They warn us against the awakening. They suggest that the hollow spaces beneath the ice are not empty. They are dormant. And the seismic spikes we are recording today are not mere tectonic shifts. They are the sound of a lock being turned from the inside. We are standing on the precipice of a revelation that threatens the very foundation of human history. We have spent centuries looking at the stars, convinced that if there were gods or higher intelligences, they would descend from the heavens. We never thought to look down. We never considered that the dreaded underworld of our ancestors was not a place of death, but a place of containment. The ice is melting. The permafrost that acted as a seal for thousands of years is retreating, revealing secrets that were meant to stay buried in the dark.
We are decoding a protocol that was never meant for human eyes. And as the coordinates align and the seismic voids begin to hum with a frequency that science cannot explain, we have to confront a terrifying possibility. We are not the masters of this earth. We are merely the surface dwellers, living out our brief, noisy lives on the thin crust of a world that belongs to someone else. And if the legends are true, if the inhabitants of Shambhala are beginning to stir, then we are not about to make contact with a lost civilization. We are about to be reminded exactly how small and how temporary our time on this surface truly is. The silence beneath the mountains is ending, and for the first time in human history, we are finally starting to listen. The wind at 24,000 feet doesn't howl. It screams with a frequency that feels like it's trying to scrub human history off the face of the earth. For decades, we looked at the Himalayan permafrost and saw nothing but a frozen graveyard, a barren expanse of ice and rock that stood as a monument to nature's indifference. We were wrong. We were looking at a tomb, but we mistook it for a mountain.
And as the permafrost continues to recede, exposing the cold, dark geometry of the bunkers below, we have to face a terrifying realization. The ancient gods didn't leave this world. They just went deeper. And they are beginning to stir. For centuries, we have looked at the Himalayan peaks as the ultimate frontier. We viewed them as barriers to be conquered, frozen cathedrals of stone and ice that stood as silent witnesses to our fleeting history. But what if the mountain was never a barrier? What if it was a lid? As we peel back the layers of the permafrost, we are not discovering history. We are uncovering an eviction notice. The evidence we have decoded from the Shambhala coordinates suggests that we have been living in a house that was never ours, occupied by a landlord who has been waiting in the dark for the lease to expire. We like to believe that humanity is the apex of this planet's evolutionary story. We tell ourselves that we are the masters of the surface, the architects of the modern age, the dominant species that tamed the wild. But beneath the ice, in the crushing silence of the hollow earth, something else has been keeping count. They are not ghosts, and they are not remnants of a lost human tribe. They are the original tenants. Their architecture defies the geometry we know. Their biology operates on a frequency we are only just beginning to detect, and their patience is measured in epochs, not years. When the seismic data return those impossible rhythmic pulses from deep beneath the crust, we try to explain them away as tectonic shifts or trapped gas. But the patterns were too deliberate. They were signals, an ancient non-human infrastructure that has remained operational while empires rose and crumbled on the surface above. We are the ephemeral inhabitants of a world governed by a civilization that views our entire history as a momentary flicker of light in a long, eternal night. We are the intruders who built our cities on top of their sanctuary, never realizing that the ground beneath our feet was breathing. The disturbing truth is not that we are alone in the universe. It is that we are not even alone on our own planet. We have spent decades searching the stars for extraterrestrial life, pointing our telescopes toward the void, while the true architects of this world were watching us from the shadows of the permafrost. They have seen us master fire, split the atom, and touch the digital age, and they have remained motionless, waiting for us to cross a threshold we do not even know exists. Every time the ice cracks, every time a strange vibration rattles the foundations of a remote village, it is a reminder that our dominance is a fragile illusion. We are entering an era where the veil is thinning. As the climate shifts and the ancient ice retreats, the secrets held in the deep are being forced into the light. We are no longer the observers. We are the observed. The Shambhala coordinates were never meant to be a map for us to follow, but a warning of what happens when we wander too close to the furnace of the earth. We are standing on the precipice of a reality that renders our geopolitical struggles and our technological advancements entirely insignificant. Imagine a civilization that has watched the mountains rise and fall. A civilization that does not need the sun to survive and does not need our permission to exist. They are not waiting for us to find them. They are waiting for us to realize that we are just guests who have overstayed our welcome. The silence beneath the ice is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of an ancient, cold, and calculated intelligence. And as we continue to push, to drill, and to decode, we must ask ourselves the most terrifying question of all. When they find
finally decide to step out from the shadows? Will we be seen as a species worthy of coexistence, or merely as a glitch that needs to be corrected? The ice is melting, the gate is open again, and the true residents of this world are finally waking up.